Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live in sync with your cycle? Do you struggle with a negative mindset around your period? Are you wondering if it's possible to be feminist and anti-birth control? We're going to explore these questions and so much more in the Managing Your Fertility podcast, because this is about helping you live a whole and full life. I'm your host and guide, Bridget Busacker, joining you in this journey of exploration related to women's healthcare, feminism, and fertility awareness. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, Damon. Welcome so much to the show. I'm so excited to have you today to talk about theology of the body, especially as it relates to marriage and how much we need this truth and we need this understanding in our lives, in our marriages today.
Thank you. It's a delight to be with you. It was a great conversation. Looking forward to it.
So before we get started, introductions need to be made so everyone is on the same page here. Damon Owens, international speaker and evangelist. He's an executive director of Joyful Ever After. He's the first executive director of the Theology of the Body Institute and chairman of the 2016 International Theology of the Body Congress. Damon founded Joyful Ever After as a nonprofit ministry dedicated to encouraging and educating couples to understand and live marriage and family life together with joy through St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body. Again, Damon, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Tell us a bit about your story and how you decided to go full-time supporting marriages and families.
Yeah, as much time you have. The sort of the Reader's Digest quick version is Melanie, my wife of 29 years this year, 2022. When we first met, we had a major conversion back to the faith that both of us had grown up with on different coasts. And we've written about this and talked about it for a while now. But I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey. She grew up in California. And we met in graduate school at Berkeley. And this looms large even now, all these years later, because our major conversion was around questions of sex, sexuality, first, of course, the morality questions, but that led us to a whole experience of what we later understood was chastity. We thought it was more abstinence and stopping because it's not against the rule, because it's against the rules. But we started to experience something in our relationship that was powerful. It was that, the philosophers talk about it, the happiness through sacrifice. It was the love through chastity. It was the, that love loves to suffer. And it was a real suffering. But that really colored our entire marriage, but that beginning sort of excitement of wanting to more. We just wanted more. So we got involved in natural family planning. We learned it. We became teachers right away. We were involved in the pro-life movement and went right into pre-Cana. And neither of us were really in that, I'm an engineer by training. She's a social worker. So this wasn't like sort of the natural step. It was all brand new and exciting, and it was all energy. But that really still colors after all these decades, because it wasn't an academic exercise. It wasn't just ideas and concepts in abstract. We have real lived experience, 30 years plus years together, where these theologies are real. I mean, they're literally fleshy, and we have memory and experience. So when we speak about theology of the body, marriage, sexuality, children, parenting, natural family planning, name all of these things, they're very personal. And that decision in 2002, after about 8-9 years together in ministry, was for me to go full time. I sold my engineering firm, and it sounds more bold than it was. I was terrified, whole life situation, but Melanie was always so encouraging. And yeah, I've been traveling the world since 2002. And as you said, a few years with the Theology Body Institute, which is such a delight. And now Joyful Ever After, where we're laser focused in helping couples get the marriage they want from the marriage they have.
This is amazing. And exactly what you said, that this isn't an academic experience. This is a personal experience. This is totally through our bodies, our memories, our experiences together. That is so important. And just the work that you've done. I mean, I'll be linking all in the show notes so individuals can experience what you're doing over at Joyful Ever After and the programming that you're working on, because it's huge. It's so needed. And I think today, especially, I want to hone in on theology of the body, living that out in marriage, because I think we hear that so much. I have individuals come to me and they're thinking, what does this mean? How do I do this? Because it sounds very heady. And then there's that disconnect. Well, NFP is hard or marriage is hard. Is that normal? Is that living it out? What am I supposed to do with that? So before we just get into practicals, could you give us maybe it's an elevator pitch or a little bit longer. What is theology of the body, especially for those who are maybe hearing it for the first time, or they've maybe heard it, seen it in some quotes on Instagram?
Sure, absolutely. And it's a beautiful thing because, we experience it based on our experiences. So what we talk about is, there are human experiences, just the phenomena of life. And then we go through this very human process of finding the meaning of it. What does that mean? Good, bad, or ugly? And when I look at the theology of the body and I teach it, it's really in one of three different ways. What is it out of all the things in the world? What does it say? Particular teachings within it. And what does it mean? In other words, why should it matter in my life? We could touch on that, over the hour. But for me, it's one of those three questions, or many of those. But what it is out of all the universe, it's a real gift that Pope John Paul II gave to the world from September 1979 to November 1984, basically the first 5 years of his pontificate. And he gave the systematic teaching, which was unique, at the balcony of St. Peter's Square to pilgrims. And, scholars and publishers came together, sort of stitched together what we found out later had actually been a book, a manuscript that he had written in 1974 to 1977 when he was elected Pope. So what we have, what we call the theology of the body, is his words. He used that phrase over 50 times, and 52 times in the documents, in describing either our origin, being made in the image and likeness of God, clear reference to Genesis 1 and 2, or the theology of the body as our history, how we, the battle of grace and sin and the battle in the heart, or in our destiny, that third triptych, as we call it, in the image of, what is our end? How do we understand heaven, salvation, redemption of the body, all the things that our Lord promised and God himself promised in Genesis to Revelation. So it's on origin, history, and destiny. John Paul II gave us a whole new vocabulary, really, to understand who we are and that process of the meaning of our experiences. And what's beautiful about it is whether you study it directly or you read about it or you start to pick up phrases, what you should notice immediately is how personal it is. And I mean that colloquially, and I also mean it, philosophically, that it's about the person. And it's helping us to not only find the deepest meaning of our experiences, but to properly sort them, to say what is really good, what is really human, what is in accord with who I am, and what things are really feel good in the moment, or they seem right, or the world says they're right, or they've been done before, but they really don't bring us joy. They don't bring us to the fullness of our humanity. And in that sense, having that right structure, that schema, or what John Paul II would call an adequate anthropology, a right understanding of what it means to be a human person. Without that right framework, we can't even process our life experience in a way that allows us really to grow in holiness. So it's a beautiful teaching that, depending how you come in, hopefully will answer the questions that you're asking. And that's where I think the power is in the theology of the body.
That's beautiful. I mean, it really is. And I think for those who thinking that, okay, I've never read the full text. I mean, there are so many options available with Christopher West Theology of the Body for Beginners, Theology of the Body Institute, so many ways that you can come into it. And like you said, it helps provide that framework where if we're a little bit off, it totally changes the way in which we see the world and how we experience ourselves. And I know for my husband and I, when we were not engaged, we were early on dating. My husband was a part of, so we're in Minnesota, the Vote No campaign. He was actually clipboarding for that in promotion of gay marriage. And the night before before doing that, we were at a Christopher West event, Fill These Hearts. And he explained theology of the body through art, through music. And my then boyfriend, now husband, David, was sitting there and he looks at me and he goes, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. This doesn't even make sense anymore. And it was like this shift happened for him. And I was just like, oh, thank God, because I'm sitting here thinking, I don't even know if I've heard this before. And we're both like on the verge of tears, like, wow, this changes how we see the world, especially being in a college setting at the time that we were, that it just like, everything is coming at you, that everything's okay and everything is possible. And in a way that it just creates such a lack of order and understanding that it almost feels overwhelming to think if I can do anything I want, something about that doesn't feel grounding, doesn't feel right. Like, I think I'm meant for more, for order.
Exactly. That's such a beautiful testimony, because it's in unique forms is what, I've had the privilege to hear for, 20 years in teaching the theology of the body. And what I hear in your testimony is that it answered questions that you were asking, yes, or it reframed experiences that you had. So the reality of your experience is what grounds you. I experienced this, good, bad, or ugly. And then as you're processing that, you're like, well, what does it mean? And how do I take this and move forward? How do I know it was good? And that is the power that you just described, that the framework, or even call it an authority, like who's the author, who writes and tells you what things mean. And then when they say it, are you just studying it to study it? Or do you begin with those things that really matter to you? And for you and your boyfriend, now husband, it sounds like it answered enough for you to have that confidence, that confide, that faith to say, I want more. Well, what about this? Let's test this. Let's try this.
Yeah.
And there's the energy. There's the energy with the theology of the body.
Yeah. And again, that experience too, and everyone's is different. That wasn't academic. It wasn't that we were studying and studying. It was, like you said, we had these questions. There was something deeper. And what we were experiencing and learning was starting to get at those to say, I need
Yes.
this, something about this. There's something innate in all of us that hears that and sees that and goes, there's something here. I can't explain it. I can't describe it, but it's answering something so deeply a part of me.
Exactly.
And I think that's that power that I think is just so beautiful and life-changing. I mean, it changed the trajectory of David's conversion story, of his own experience in the faith, and mine in our marriage. And that's really where I want to get into when it comes to marriages and building out holy marriages. We hear this application, like I said a little bit earlier. Okay, how does this apply? What does it look like to live out theology of the body? Because I think you hear theology and you think, oh, it's an academic experience. It's philosophical. I need to be studying it, when it's really in the living out. And there might be some studying and some learning, some skill building, but what does that look like in applying theology of the body to your relationship, to your marriage, to yourself, and to your spouse?
Yeah, first, just a caveat, because it sounds like we might be bashing the academia, but these guys have made this all accessible to us. And I know you believe that. So just to be clear, when we say not academic, I think we're talking about the energy, the movement, the emotion, but the intellectual study that's been done from John Paul II all the way through, even Dr. Mikhail Waldstein, who did the translation, and Katrina Zeno, who you mentioned, Christopher West. There's a whole cadre of John Grabowski, that are doing this, and we owe a lot to them. But when it comes to us in our everyday life, that's what we're saying here, that, to your question, how does this apply to my life in a way that I don't just do it because I got to do it, but it really is part of this self-discovery of our identity, of our relationships, and of our mission, our vocation in life. I don't mean just a capital V of celibacy for the sake of the kingdom or marriage. That's there for sure. But the broader sense of vocation, who am I called to be? So these things don't get asked and answered in one moment. It's always a progression, in the good sense that every question leads to an answer, which leads to a deeper question. So it's always this energy to discover. And that's what we mean by it's not just academic, like we're doing it just to be, sound smart at dinner parties. But this is changing the way, as you said, I see the world, I see myself, and I see others. So when we get down to the practicals, I find that many people, rightly so, enter into the theology of the body in a very practical way. They're asking questions about their vocation, whether you're young, single, or whether you are married for a certain number of years, or you're considering marriage, or the priesthood, religious life, celibacy, or virginity. These questions, you have to have the right, sense to get to real discernment with that. So it ends up in that question is, how do I live my life? Some are just identity questions. I'm not happy, and I'm not joyful. I feel restless. There's an anxiety. And there are psychological approaches, there are emotional, therapeutic, there are, sort of self-help books. So there's lots of different, anthropologies about how to get to that. But in the end, we don't have time to try all these, and to be sort of this all coming experience. But we start to find people that we trust. We find a framework that gives us early successes in helping to explain experiences. And then we have this courage to enter deeper. And what it ends up doing in this theology of the body is that it helps us to ground the spiritual, the supernatural, God himself, and connect it to the human experience, the material world. The idea that the body itself could be a study of God. And in some sense, it jolts you based on how you enter into it. If you're particularly spiritual and sort of accepting the material world, it's very jolting to think the body could be a theology. If you're very material and you're into the body and the world and creation, it's very jolting to think that, I'm going to hyper spiritualize it. Why can't it just be about, the sunset or my physical health or whatever? So there's always a jolt, but it depends on where we come from, of bringing together in a whole integrated way. It's a big TOB word, integration, into one, a wholeness between the spiritual and the material. And that doesn't mean it's a sameness. It's a danger that there's clear and important distinctions. And it's in those distinctions that allow two to become one, to become together what neither one could be on their own. And the words we use are communion, of love as self-gift, receptivity, of the integration, as I said, between the spiritual and the material. And one of the several sort of key quotes in the theology of the body is the body, in fact, only the body, is capable of transmitting into the visible reality of the world the invisible mystery hidden eternally in God and be a sign of it. Right? So that there's one of John Paul II's pull quotes that just says, look, these things are distinct, as most things are, but we need the distinction and complementarity in order to enter into a communion, whether it's male, female, whether it's light and dark, whether it's the waters above, the waters below in the Genesis story, whether it's faith and reason. There's this beautiful both and, but the male female, John Paul elevates and says, this is the pivot of civilization, that getting this male female relationship is at the heart of understanding what it means to be human. So now it's an elevation of the dignity, the value, the worth to say, this is the whole ballgame, right? And then the whole civilization passes by way of the family. Now it's saying, if you're going to study something, if you're going to spend the work to understand something, this is worth it. And I think there is where you get people who, whether there's struggling with gender identity, struggling in marriage or discernment of a vocation, struggling in terms of their own self-worth and self-esteem, this both and takes the universal truth about who we are as a human person made in the image and likeness of God to the unique, unrepeatable I that you are, that there's never been another you like you and never will be, that there's a dignity to your I, your subject, who you are. And yet we have so much in common from our humanity that we can have podcasts, that we can have courses, that we can have, talks and this mutual learning. And it seems like a contradiction or a paradox. We're universal, but also we're unique and unrepeatable. But when you hold that paradox together in tension, you have the ability to see what you cannot see by falsely resolving one or the other. That's a theme throughout the theology of the body, of holding these things in tension so they can reveal a deeper truth. And it's exciting. It's really entering into a mystery.
This is awesome. What you just said, that last part of holding things in tension, I think that's something that I've seen more and more, this discomfort with being able to do that. And I think, a lot of it has to do with, if you don't have that right framework, if you're not understanding that we're both physical, spiritual beings and how we work together and communion, it doesn't really make sense. Why would I hold things in tension? And I mean, there are other reasons to apply to that, but I think that's really powerful to understand that both and is important, and holding things in tension is actually okay. Because
it's necessary. And what it does too, Bridget, it reveals something about our culture. Because, we grew up in the culture that we're bringing. And in our Western, modern, contemporary culture, we hate conflict. We hate, tension. We want to resolve it. We want the answer, and technology is the promise to find these answers. And it's somewhat, the predominance of that is unique to us, especially when you look across different cultures or across different time. But, that's why it's hard for us, because it's very countercultural.
Which is important. And I think something that we have to be willing to lean into and explore a little bit more, to say, wow, it's countercultural to lean into tension and to lean into the paradox of tension, to say, this is actually okay. This is how I learn. This is how I grow. This is how I understand who I am and who God has made me to be.
Yes.
And that's powerful. Yeah. And I think in everything that you're describing, I mean, this really lays the framework for understanding why it is not only good and necessary, it's important. We are made women and we are made men. There is reason to this. There is value in this, and it's important. It's important as it plays out in our marriages. So maybe you can speak a little bit more to that too. And not only, I think the goodness of that, but also the benefits to marriage. And when we lean into being made man and being made woman.
Yeah, I use the word reason, and I think that's an entry point for so many people. Things just have to make sense, right, to get through. But thankfully, it's not just reason; it's also, there's a beauty in it when you see it for what it is, and the power that it's from the origin and even now. And there's a goodness to it. I mean, there really is just this something in the will that just says, this is good, this is worthy of it. So whether it's goodness, truth, beauty, those transcendentals, the theology of the body really helps us to meet us where we are and what moves our mind or our hearts. So I think the place to start really is our baptism, let's start here. Our baptism as sons and daughters of God the Father that makes us there really changes everything. That from there on, we are in this intimate relationship with the author of the universe, whom we call a father because he has the capacity to create outside of himself and then to ensure the good of what he created. That's the beautiful definition of authority, or to be the author, to be a father. So when we speak about our baptism and our fatherhood, that we're now adopted, and that's not an asterisk. It's this beautiful covenant that allows us to be full sons and daughters of God the Father, the creator of the universe. That really does change everything. And being in that relationship with God as Father and allows us then to see, what have you created, Dad? What is our role in it? Mm-hmm. What authority and power have you transferred to us that carries with it a awe, wonder, a fascination, a role, task, a mission, a vocation, all these things, but it all flows in a really integrated way. We do these things because of who we are. And because of who we are, we're called to do certain things. So there's this beautiful, again, this both and between identity through the relationship and the mission of what God gives us. So that's sort of the first posture. That we're sons and daughters of God the Father through baptism. And as the author of creation, we read through these early stories, just like our Lord told us, whether it's, Gospel of Matthew, that, from the beginning, it was not so. Even then calling people back to those original stories of creation, because while we'll never get back there, they still reveal that on this side of sin, there's an original dignity that endures. There's an original truth that can't be defined just by the entrance of our separation from God in sin, not just from the loss of gifts, for first parents, Adam and Eve. There's an original dignity that endures now. It also carries with it a lens to understand our destiny. And, I'm a recovering engineer. Some of viewers might know that. So, when you have an origin point and you have a destiny, then you have everything you need, for vocation. You're moving from this point to this point. So that origin and that destiny give us really the lens to understand how we live now in history. What are we moving toward? Who am I? What have I been given? And that origin story begins not with commandments. It doesn't begin with the law. It doesn't begin with even dogma. It begins with poetry. And the poetry of what it means of God's creation, first from his view to man and create Genesis 1, and then from man's view to God in Genesis 2. And then we hold these stories together. And as Jean Paul invites us to, it reveals this supernatural identity, relationship, and mission. And there is where, to your point, there is where, Bridget, that male, female has that original dignity that needs to be redeemed and restored, that we are made, as that first story says, Genesis 1:27, let us make man in our own image, after our own likeness. Male and female, he created them and he blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, have dominion over the earth and subdue it. So this creation doesn't mean it was by accident. It wasn't a process. It was God forming from his deepest mystery of who he is. Now, careful, God is not sexual. So he created sex when he created us. So there's something about our sexuality, a sexed, sexually dimorphic, these are big terms, sexual difference in the body that reveals the sexual difference in the person, that if it originates in God is meant to reveal something about him. And the spoiler is love as communion. That we can love in communion, a common union, a communion, an ability that allows our difference not to be a difference from only, but a difference for. So here we have this revelation of God, the deepest mystery of God, that's revealed when he created us as body persons and then sexed body persons, so that the equality of male and female now has this difference, not just from, but difference for. Be fruitful in this love as communion. Have dominion over the earth, not domination, but right dominion, because I'm sharing my authority with you. And my authority carries with it this mission of life and love. That life itself is this call to deeper and deeper love as communion, self-gift, receiving the other. And love itself has the capacity to create new life in the lover, the initiative gift, in the beloved, the one who receives the gift, And in this miracle of miracles, it has the capacity to create a third person who never existed before that will live eternally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact that God shared that with us should put us on our knees. And, it's like, why?
Yeah.
God could create out of anything. He could do it any way, right? He's God. But he chose this communion of man and woman as the power to create another in his image and likeness. Now, we're not sole creators. We are co-creators.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, here's the tension. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the author, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. We say that every Sunday in the Creed. So literally with every yes of a man and a woman entering into sexual union, it's an invitation for the Holy Spirit to come and to create that new life. So right off the bat in this first story, without even getting to the Adam and Eve, which is the jewels, we see that there's an original dignity, a value, a worth that didn't get lost in this entrance of sin. We had distance from it, but God has pursued us to restore and to elevate what even our first parents had. This story is just, when you get into it, you're like, Lord, why, how, why? We're not worthy. This is not something we can earn.
Yeah.
This is just this lavish prodigal. This is the prodigal father just lavishing us with authority and life and love. And we have to check our hearts, because then we're just like, oh, it's just sex, or, it's sex, or, it's sex. We're going to be like, it's sex, the noun and the verb. Like, look what this is.
Yeah, this is the way you described it was just like building out this incredible story that I'm sitting here thinking, I can't believe that I was given the opportunity to co-author Two Little Lives.
Yes.
And a third up in heaven. I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild. And I hear that and I think, oh my gosh, like how many of us are walking around and we're numb? We're totally wrong framework, even if just slightly off. Like you said, maybe we spiritualize the body so much, or maybe we are so obsessed with the body, we're slightly off that none of this wows us. We're just like, oh yeah, this is just my life. Or like, oh, I have to have sex with my husband. Or like, oh, I'm going to have sex with 5 different people this weekend. Like, we're not understanding this possibility of what this means to be in communion with another person. And then we get to have the possibility of co-authoring new life. I mean, when you said there's a new person and this person gets to live eternally, I'm like chills. It's like, I know this, but yet every time you can hear it and you hear it in a new way, you're like, oh my gosh, this is huge. And yet we talk about it. It's like, well, yeah, you get married, you have kids, you do your thing. Then, you save up for retirement. Hopefully you have a lot of money and then you get to go like retire in Florida, whatever. Here's the storyline. And it's like,
right.
But you could live outside of the box, still within the roles of man and woman and understanding how you're created, but so much more than what we're being sold and told from like small ages that like, no, numb out because this is all there is and it's not that awesome. It's like we're so terrified of the reality that like actually our lives could be incredible because they are, and we can live in that reality that our bodies are good, we're made good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So here's the balm, because people, I've done this long enough to know how just afflicting that can be to people as they start reflecting on their own lives. And so did John Paul II, because early on he got into forgiveness and mercy of God. So here's the other thing: we're children of God, right? We're not called to be childish, but we're childlike. Mm-hmm. So the point is, we'll never get this perfectly right. It's not as if we have this epiphany and we realize what it is, and then from then on, we're on the straight path. We're kids, and we're kids with a dad who's delighted in us. So when we fail, and we do, to live, to love, to be able to see the wonder, fascination in the other, and we all do. Then what do? Are we the servant who think like, oh, I suck, I can't believe, oh, I'm just so bad, I'm gonna get fired, I'm gonna get unsunned, I'm gonna get undaughtered, right? Like I failed, so God's not gonna. Or are we the son and daughter who just knows that Daddy's delighted in us and He wants us to begin and begin again? I see that when we fail, we say, oh, I've sinned against heaven, I've sinned against you, I'm sorry, I messed it up. He says, that's all right, get up, here we go, let's do it again. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's Melanie, forgive me. Sometimes it's, the kids, Naomi, Leah, Rachel, Therese, Colette, Veronica, Olivia's kids, I'm sorry. Sometimes it's forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 1 week since my last confession, but we begin again.
Yeah.
So we want to sort of disabuse in the beginning this idea that when we hear the aspirational perfection, when we hear what God's calling to us, that we don't just look at the gap between there and who we are and think, I'll never. No, that's not how kids think. Kids are like, whoa, look how many stairs are up there. And you start climbing up the stairs, right? And you look at your kids, you're like, you can't climb those stairs. But there's something in you as a mom and as a dad where you're like, that's really cute. You're trying. I want to help you. I want to help you. That's the essential other piece here. Otherwise, the theology of the body becomes a yoke. It becomes a cross. It becomes a walking rebuke.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great point to make, because I know in talking with a few friends where they heard theology of the body and then they just felt this like shame immediately. They were like, oh,
yes,
I'm not doing this right. I don't have this amazing viewpoint. I don't think about sex in a good way. Like, I am really uncomfortable with a cross over my bed. Like, what's going on? And just these things that were coming up for them. And like you said, that balm that's needed to be reminded of the mercy of Christ, and that this isn't about being perfect, because I think that tendency is very much there. And I think in the pursuit of theology of the body, I think also remembering Satan doesn't want us to have this information available to us. And he really would like to keep this away. So, obviously, like, remembering that, but it sometimes is so not obvious to us. And we forget, like, oh, wait, that shame, that does not come from God. He's not shaming me that I don't know this.
No,
he's a redeemer.
Shame is never, ever of the Lord. Guilt is, right? When we're out of the law and we know that we're out of order, guilt is a gift. That's when the alarm bells are ringing. Fire, fire, fire. But shame says, I didn't steal. I am a thief. Shame gets to the identity, and that's where the devil loves to play, to separate our identity from God. So, again, it's this delight of a child that wants to be an adult. We want to be grown up, but we don't put the whole weight of our adulthood on us, because we don't make ourselves perfect. God is perfecting us.
Yeah.
But if we don't know where he's taking us, then everything becomes confused.
Yeah, it becomes a total burden because we don't know where we're going and what's happening. I loved how you did my husband's an engineer. So when you're talking about, okay, here's the point of origin, here's the destiny, this is where we're going. I'm like, man, I know what you're saying now.
I used to say, this is a vector. It's a vector of aspiration, and you need 2 points for a vector.
That's the language I hear around here. I've adapted. It's really good. I know what you're saying. And it's helpful though. We know where we're going. And otherwise it's just, like you said, it's total confusion. It doesn't make sense why we're doing what we're doing, or why we're investing in our marriages. Why are we choosing to love the other when it hurts, when it doesn't feel good, when it's confusing, when NFP is super hard or feels kind of easy? And then you're wondering, am I using it wrong? Is something going on? And none of it makes sense without understanding, okay, this is the destiny. This is where I'm headed. So I want to get into more about your programming with Joyful Ever After and the practicals of building out a joy-filled marriage and living out everything that you've just described. Okay, how do we do this? We started to dabble a little bit with like the sacraments, confession, forgiveness, communication. And so I'd love to hear you and your wisdom and your programming, everything that you're doing and approaching that and building out healthy, holy marriages.
Yeah, sincerely, please pray for us, because we see this Mount Horeb here and the thunder with God, and we see all that's there, and we know full well it's not ours to scale alone. But marriage is really the great original gift. Because of our sexuality, we have this great primordial, I love that word, primordial gift, that we can become such gift to one another. I am yours and you are mine. That together we can enter into such communion that it is the icon, it is the sign of life and love to the world. So not everyone marries, not everyone has children. Your story is yours. But when you hold up the icon of what could be, you actually order your entire life toward that good, whether it's in friendship, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a sibling, whether it's your own parents. Every relationship has a potency, has a power for communion. So because I started with baptism is what makes things so different for us as sons and daughters, everything else after that is the fulfillment. It is the flourishing through that relationship. So by the time we move through communion with the Lord, actually to eat and to have him as part of ourselves, as we move to confession, the ability to begin and begin again with real grace, with real power, then we start to enter into the powers of confirmation and the Holy Spirit. But then we choose a state of life. We make a decision as in human maturity and formation. How will I live this call to life and love? And the church gives us 2 great vocations: celibacy for the sake of the kingdom, meaning that we order our sexual energy, our sexual power, our sexual being toward this marriage of Christ, the bridegroom, and the church as the bride. It's still marital, but it's the eternal marriage of Christ, the bridegroom, and the church as the bride. Paul speaks about that in Ephesians. Jesus calls himself the bridegroom in the Gospels, and you read the book of Revelation, and it's very clear about heaven itself being a wedding feast that follows the marriage of Christ, the bridegroom, and the church as the bride. So it's very marital, but it's ordering our sexuality for that eternal marriage. Or you choose marriage itself, the sign of that eternal marriage. That's how, again, this is how as Christians, as Catholics, we understand marriage, that it's not an end, it is a means to the end. It is a privilege, primordial, first gift that God gives us to become what we are, to become life and love. So the sign of marriage has all this dignity and grace and power, state of life that we, many of us order our lives toward, but it's not an end. In many rightly understood, marriage is marriage preparation. So the sacrament of marriage is marriage prep. It's preparing us for that eternal marriage, whereas some are called to live that eternal marriage now, priests, religious life, consecrated virgins, to be the bride. Or to enflesh the bridegroom as our priests are. But some of us need a lifelong work to become bride, to experience and assign what it is to be bone of bone and flesh of flesh, to be one. But it's all in preparation for that eternal marriage. So notice the language here, that it's very different, rightly so, because of baptism, than what the world says about marriage. That marriage now has become the personal choice of adults for fulfillment of an emotion. I feel this way. I want to be with you. We'll do this as long as we can, and we hope it lasts. But we want to do the best. So it's all about the affect. It's all about how you make me feel and how I feel when I'm with you. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just it's incomplete. It's insufficient. It cannot give what our heart desires. So the sacrament of marriage now says, no, this thing is actually bound in that vector of aspiration, is bound in the origin of the destiny, that we're preparing for something. And this is why we endure. This is why we suffer for love. This is why we're willing to make this radical gift of ourselves and to receive someone radically to be mine until death do us part. And the sign is both this grace that God gives us, but it's also a sign. It is a sacrament that leads us to something else, something more real, something eternal. That alone separates us from the world when we speak about marriage. That's why we can talk about things like natural family planning, or to speak about a lifelong marriage, or how do we grow our family, in the discernment of children and natural family planning. All these things are all ordered in the same culture, the same universe. And when you start to pull things out, these things start to make less and less sense. So without the whole schema, NFP makes no sense. Contraception is genius. If there were no Jesus, contraception is genius. I mean, just think about it. But there is Jesus, and he is. So the sin there, the attack that contraception is by its nature is an attack on love. It's an attack on the self-gift. It's an attack on the willingness to accept what God has given us of life and love. And natural family planning, even with its same end of either achieving or postponing pregnancy, has a deeper end of deepening our life and our love as husband and wife, and of embracing what God has given us as a vocation. And that whole thing, again, it doesn't make sense outside of the vocation of our baptism. It makes no sense. So we have to keep that very close. Otherwise, we get just lulled into the same sleep as the culture, that we're measuring these things based on effectiveness, or we're based on how they make us feel. And we got to check ourselves, be like, oh, wait a minute, that's not who I am.
Wait, wow. Yeah. I just keep thinking about how you said marriage is marriage prep for the heavenly banquet. I'm like, wow, that just shifts everything.
Doesn't it?
I think like, wow, this explains even more so like why this is so hard. Like, I think, you can think about it from a vocational standpoint, like, yes, this will be hard. And we're leaning into the cross. And sometimes my spouse is my cross and I'm my spouse's cross. But to say and think, well, this is marriage prep for that final eternal marriage. I mean, that just adds that next layer, like, wow, even more of that destiny that point again of saying, okay, this is where I'm going. This is what
Yeah.
we're doing. This is
Yeah.
what we're going for. And I think does help with things like natural family planning, where you're thinking, why are we doing this? And not that the church requires that you do it, but if you're choosing it and you're implementing it into your marriage, probably not perfectly, as since we are all imperfect, but you're trying, there is such a point of sacrifice in those moments of choosing, okay, avoiding, achieving, what are we doing? What is God calling us to? It's these deeper questions again. Okay, are we called to co-author a new life, another eternal soul that will exist forever? I mean, these are deep, deep questions that theology of the body, like you've framed for us throughout this conversation, really does help us answer and to see and understand, okay, how does this make sense now of my life, my worldview? What am I doing? Because I think to stay in emotions, we're actually just, it's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. It's so much harder to stay in emotions and to say, I'll love you until or when this happens, or until I feel a certain way, or when it gets too hard, like 95% hard, but not 91% hard, then I might bow out.
Right.
It's just, it's creates so much more internal frustration and anxiety. I mean, what to add to the anxiety levels that we see and depression that we see, like we're adding these finite measures to something that is an infinite gift that is preparing us for something eternal.
And I think part of that too is because it's in a certain sense, it's serving two masters. And whether it's sitting on the fence, whatever the analogy is, but we need to be very clear about who we are, whose we are, and why we're here. And when we lose it, we need to get reminded to begin again. But if we try to reconcile what the world says will make us happy and what we do, what God says, for me at least, that's where the anxiety comes in. I want to have all of these things. I want to be loved and esteemed and all these things. But at the same time, it's like, wait a minute, that's not necessarily who I am. That may coincide once in a while, but you can't serve both of those masters. And the other thing is that it helps us too in the weeds of marriage to discern when marriage is rightly difficult, because there's injustice that makes marriage difficult, and sometimes it's the justice that makes it difficult. And it's hard to tell when you feel the same way, when it feels attacked, when you feel inadequate, when you're frustrated. We need really much in marriage. I can say that after 29 years, you need to be very clear about whether the frustration is because of my lack, or it's because of my wrong vision, or because I'm pursuing something that's not the goodest good, right? And that horizon that we have about marriage as marriage preparation, on one hand, it doesn't give license to abuse. It doesn't give license to, physical, sexual, emotional, these things that anything goes. It's not absolute in that sense, because you can break covenant. You can break vow, right? In the covenant, you'll still be married. Yeah. But the relation that's established in marriage is distinct and actually first order from the relationship. This is why we see marital relationships failing, and they break our hearts and everyone around it, but it doesn't break the relation. And I think that's a huge point here, that when we talk about the permanency of marriage, we're not saying that you stick together no matter what and the relationship will flourish because it's a sacramental marriage. No, it avails us of all this intimacy with God, with this aspiration, toward heaven. But what's established permanently in a relation still takes the work that you've said half a dozen times since we've started. The work of what makes marriage hard is building the relationship in the right order of that relation. And that's been very fruitful in Joyful Ever After and helping couples stay married, because that's our focus. Our focus is to help couples stay married. We did decades, Melanie and I, of helping couples to get married, right? And wanting to be married. And that's hugely important. But the Lord's really called us to focus on helping couples stay married. And as you said, it requires skills. It requires this correct horizon and outlook on what your marriage is and what God is doing with you, in you, through you, in your marriage. But it also is a heart check where we have to purge out these things that are not of God, expectations, memories, wounds, traumas, and replace them, or you can drown them out, with these authentically good, true, and beautiful aspirations about holiness, about loving until death and knowing that love is stronger than death, about building a skill and learning how to love this particular other person in the way they need to be loved as an act of love. Right? of coming to the truth about how I need to be loved. And knowing that the desire to be loved is not the same as helping my beloved love me. It's an act of love to teach them how to love you. And sometimes the act of love is doing the work in our own homework of our own heart, saying, I don't know how I love. I don't know what would register me as love. Help me to discover this. And you see sort of the ease that happens with that, as opposed to breaking it down just to the moral law. You must do this. You have to do this. Like that's not human. The law keeps us from evil, but it doesn't make us holy.
Yeah.
So it's the grace of God, the presence of God that sanctifies. The law keeps us in lane. It keeps us in the highway, but it doesn't give us the joyful journey. So how do we live the joy of our journey and come to the truth about being able to fulfill the marital vows? I give myself to you freely, without coercion, conditions. Totally, I am yours and you are mine. Until death do us part, faithfully and fruitfully, because I'll lovingly accept children that God may bless us with and raise them in the knowledge of the Lord and his church. Those 4 vows: free, total, faithful, fruitful. Again, this is why marriage is such an icon. And that should be sort of the home base when we discern as a husband and wife, is our marriage making us holy? Are we seeking sanctification, which in and of itself is a joy when we're doing it right?
That's beautiful. It really is. And it's so helpful because then there's a roadmap. Like you said, it's not just about the law, like, okay, you can't do this. I mean, it's really getting into deeply of ourselves and understanding, okay, I'm understanding myself. And am I understanding the person I'm married to? Am I loving them in the way that they need to be loved? Because those are the questions that get at, I think, a lot of those challenges or questions of, okay, am I abusing their love? And I'm not even getting to the extremes of physical, sexual abuse. I'm thinking like, okay, emotionally, like maybe I'm really not loving them in the way they need to be loved, or I'm not really giving, these little things that get in the way, like vices, and where we need to be growing in virtue, where it's like, wow, if I actually work on this, like this could totally change our marriage. This could totally help my spouse feel completely loved.
Yeah.
In a totally different way, maybe not completely by me, but in a radical way that totally shifts how the trajectory of our marriage changes. And
I'm not sure if how long you've been married, but I know you've experienced this, Bridget, where you may have taken just a doubt out of your own heart, a fear out of your own heart, small one, doesn't be huge, and all of a sudden the love from John, the whole love from your husband, it's just it magnifies, because sometimes it's just those little things that keep us from receiving love.
It's wild. Yeah. So Dave and I have been married 5.5 years, and that's enough, right? A year, 6 months, a month. There's so much that comes into play that you're like, oh my gosh, like you start to see yourself in a totally different way than when you were dating. I used to say, like, when we were first married, we both had this tension, like, gosh, if you could just like go away for a little bit, then I could kind of be in my sweatpants, eat Cheetos on the couch by myself. And it was like, you're still here. And then it was like, wow, there's this level of like, I want you to see me and I don't want you to see me, because I don't know if you'll receive me, and then that moment when you realize this person does receive me. Okay, what's happening here? And just that heart work of yourself that you're doing, and then if the other person's doing too, and you're seeing like, wow, this is living out marriage. This is the mess here of really seeing ourselves and saying, okay, I do receive this person. Do I trust that they receive me? And what's going on that maybe if that isn't there, how do we heal that? How do we work on that? How do we choose holiness? What does it look like to actually choose that and live it out?
Oh, you're moving my heart. This is Joyful Ever After, our ministry. That's probably an icon, if I can use that word, of all the different ways that couples come to us. And what Melanie and I have unveiled over these years is that you do begin with what the Greeks would call a persona. It's the mask that just says, look, I'm the happy mask, I'm the sad mask, I'm the angry mask, right? And there's the persona when you meet someone, like, oh, Bridget's beautiful. I met this girl and I got it, and it fits into sort of a persona. And the love requires us to take the mask off and to move from a persona to a person.
Yeah.
And that person is complicated. It's she's nuanced. He doesn't even know himself. And it's your relationship with Damon and Melanie that reveals more about me than I knew about myself. And I'm not sure I like it all. and I'm scared that you won't like it,
Yeah.
and that you won't love me. So I keep grabbing the persona, like, well, but I'm still, and it's this tension of allowing ourselves to be seen, good, bad, and ugly, and to know that we can be loved for who we are, not for what we do. And I belong irreplaceably to you. And that should sound familiar. This is the gospel. This is God the Father. This is the prodigal father. I see you. I know you. I love you. You don't earn my love. You're not the sum of your weaknesses and your failures. You're my daughter. You're my daughter. And I will tell you when you're not acting in accord with who you are, but I will love you. I will will your good.
Yes.
And I'll never expect you to earn what you can never do. See, this is why marriage becomes this school of love, because it's calling us to a love that we can't live on our own. And that only God can actually give us the love that we promise at the altar. And we desperately need it, even as we're not being judged. We're being encouraged. We're being called. It's a wooing. God is wooing us to draw closer to him in our weakness. Kid falls down trying to climb stairs. Imagine being a mom and being like, oh, well, you shouldn't have tried that. Try harder next time. Your heart goes like, my baby. Oh, you're such a big boy for trying. If we can do that, why is it so hard, Damon, to imagine God as my father doing it? And I got all these other hangups that makes it hard to see. And that trickles into every moral question, every relational question, every doubt about our identity. It really is part of the original sin and the shame that encountered after.
Yeah, as you say that, it makes me think of the Passion when Christ falls and Mary runs after him and has that memory. And I remember just
love that
that was the scene that just broke my heart open when I first saw the Passion. I was like, because I think it brings those questions, that shame from original sin of thinking, okay, I can do this with someone else who I love dearly. You see Mary doing it with Jesus, but I can't imagine God doing that with me. What is that? What is that break in relationship to say, okay, but he does do that with us. That is the truth of who he is, regardless of how we might filter it through in our own sin and our own brokenness. And like you said, with persona versus person, I think that's a beautiful way to imagine, just like the masks, like, okay, here I am. Okay, now I take off all the masks. Like, this is everything. This is no masking, no showing parts of myself. This is the whole person. I remember dating David. I'm the oldest of 4, 12 years apart siblings. We were married our early 20s. So my siblings were on the younger end, middle school when I was engaged. And I remember they'd have moments of like, has David seen that side of you yet? Oh, he still likes you. Wow, that's amazing. And that's my brother was always, and it brings up those memories like, wow, like they love me, but they were able to just go out there and be like, really? He's still okay. He likes you.
Yeah, right.
That's weird.
Let me tell you about Bridget. Let me tell you the truth about Bridget.
And it has been, oh yeah. And it was like that. Those memories would come back early married, like, oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I am really losing my patience. Like I might in my home where I saw it was, fortunately I'm blessed with a family where it was like, okay, I could be my whole person, but also there's a calling on from that childishness where to, the childlike behavior, and also saying, okay, these are the areas of my vices. And this person is calling me on and helping me and reminding me and bringing me and helping me say, okay, hey, you know what? We need to go to adoration and confession night. We both need it. It's like, yeah, you're right. We both really do. And the power in that is huge too. The sacrament along with the skill building, it's huge.
And one of the trustful fruits of that is joy. You can't fake joy. And by joy, I don't mean just happiness. That's an emotion based on circumstance and condition. But joy is this irredeemable knowing of who we belong to. That we're loved for who we are, and that it can endure sorrow, it can endure suffering. My mom died in January, and it was great sorrow, great suffering. But there was a joy there, watching her die, because she was soaked in the graces, soaked in sacramental graces, faithful woman, and Alzheimer's robbed a lot of the memories, but it was like a most immediate recognition of how there can be joy and suffering, joy and sorrow, because it wasn't happy, but there was a sense of this I'm where I'm supposed to be. This is what's supposed to be happening, and God is in it. He's not abandoned us. And so all that stuff that we talked about it's not a thing in and of itself that we somehow grope along. We do get these moments of joy that remind us that it's not just about the affective happiness. It really is about maintaining that irreplaceable belonging to someone. It's
Mhm.
always worth fighting for.
Mhm. That both and that you spoke to with your
Mm,
mom's passing, that joy and that sorrow, that tension again, the paradox of that tension of I can exist in this space and to be alive in that and to experience that is so much more powerful than numbing out and saying, I want to feel nothing.
yes,
It's
yes.
better to feel it all, to know I'm alive, I am here, and God is in all of it, which is, I think that reminder that in all situations and circumstances, whether in the death of someone we love, in our marriage, in the challenges of child rearing, infertility, God is in all of it, and He exists in that both and He's not forsaking us.
That's right. That's right. And again, as you were talking about that too, I was just recalling, the whole, why is, in this case, natural family planning or fertility so hard? Why is it such a difficult conversation reconciling our own fertility, having that as this means of communion as a husband and wife, and then on top of that, the vocation of, do we achieve, do we postpone, or we have another child? Am I supposed to? I mean, the whole drama of the natural family planning lifestyle. This is why everything we've talked about. This is why it is so difficult to live it without that whole schema of the sacramentality of marriage leading to the end, of thinking it's just of trying to use natural family planning in the way the world uses contraception.
Mhm.
That's the serving of the two masters. Like it's just a tool to help me get what I want, or it's the church's approved tool to get what I want.
Yeah.
And if anything I've learned about using, teaching, and promoting natural family planning is that it goes both ways in terms of being a very practical. It is the practicum of the theology of the body, that you can come in without any knowledge of the theology of the body. And now you're gaining all of this experience just by observational methods of NFP and speaking with your husband and charting this fertility and starting to grow and sort of an awe, wonder, fascination. You
Mhm.
start asking different questions where the theology of the body helps you to understand the meaning of those experiences. Or you can do the other way, where you're learning the theology of the body, and then you're finding a way, okay, how do I be fruitful and multiple, have dominion over the earth and subdue it? And how do I live God's particular vocation? And you see the beauty of natural observational methods. It's like, oh, this helps me to us as a couple to perfectly discern our family. So there's no conflict there when the whole paradigm or the schema is there.
Mhm.
But if we try to serve two masters, NFP is imminently frustrating and unnecessarily difficult, because it's telling you that something is out of order. But there's also the beauty of it, that helping us to restore and to live that order of the
Mhm.
sexual powers, of the sexual gift, of the call to be mother and to be father. There's nothing, there's nothing that compares. And John Paul II was very strong about where natural family planning fits into modern marriages. And it's hard to read Familiaris Consortio, his
Mhm.
document on the family in 1981, without seeing the stark, you know, the analogy I use, it stirs some feathers, but this is how I read John Paul II is, the church also doesn't require us to pray the rosary. It doesn't require us to go to adoration. It doesn't require, all these things that we know have this imminent and irreplaceable effect on our relationship with God. But I challenge people to read Familiaris Consortio, paragraphs 17, 32, 35. Read the whole thing, but if you're going to just, poke at it,
Mhm.
and he talks about what I believe is why modern natural family planning, or the observation of fertility awareness, for many of us is one of these essentials. It's an essential for us to restore that wonder, awe, fascination with this great mutual gift of our fertility. And it's pretty strong language. And I used that in I think a 13 episode series for EWTN, in 2008, 2009. And I came, full tilt with these quotes and with the stitching it together. And I stand by it. I think there's something eminently, inherently good about coming to not just a peace, but a wonder, fascination, and an awe with your particular fertility, with your particular capacity to create life through love. And
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to link that too, because I've read through half of Familiaris Consortio, and I was amazed at how clear John Paul II was, because I guess when I picked it up, I thought it might be kind of heady or a lot of analogies, but no, he was very specific in how he sees your responsibility for parenthood, using NFP, honoring each other in your manhood and womanhood, honoring each other in sexuality, I was just like, whoa, how are we not turning this into course upon course and like making it a part of marriage prep? I mean, truly. So thank you for saying that too with NFP and just like clarifying that as well. And I liked what you said, and that like the rosary is not, it's not required. Adoration isn't required, but we know the graces that come from it. And I think that is true. Just, you know, I think everyone has their own story with NFP, but those, I can only speak for myself. We know that it's been huge in our marriage and understanding the gift and the wonder. And when we have those frustrations, it really challenges us to say, okay, why am I frustrated? What's going on here? Like, why are you frustrated? Hold on. We don't have to abstain. We're choosing this. Oh yeah, we're choosing that. We're choosing to love each other in this way. Like it brings up those harder, deeper questions that you otherwise really, you don't think of when you use a condom or you pop a pill, because you don't have to. You've made that choice and you'll talk about it at some point later. And that's what many have shared with me, that it's a totally different framework in which you exist out of, in which you have conversations out of, which is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do go through, and it's necessary based on people's experience or objections, or, you know, how they're coming in. There are some questions that need to be answered, some clarifications there. So we're talking in broad brushes, and John Paul II again is very, very clear about that strong language there. But the heart of what he's getting at is not any particular method. It's not any particular technique. It's the whole orientation of ordering our sexual intimacy, our marital vows toward the vocation, and what the observational methods can do to constantly sometimes purge from our hearts an overdependency on things, sometimes illuminate to give light to really unique situations in our marriage, and also a means of drawing into a unity in our marriage that really is it's irreplaceable. There's the ways of doing it. Is it possible to live marriage with NFP? Of course. That's not, can you get to heaven without the rosary? Can you get to heaven without going to mass? God can do whatever God's going to do. But we're talking about the normative ways for us to grow in holiness. So literally we're skipping purgatory. We're ready for that ultimate union with God. And when you look at it in that sense, there's something here that's worth sorting out all of the particular objections that we may have in our hearts.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and giving us this amazing framework. I'm so excited to honestly re-listen, and I'm going to listen to it with David, and just to be able to share this, because this is so helpful to be able to provide this framework for everyone to understand where are we coming from? How does this make sense? And then to make sense of NFP too, because that's a lot of the questions that I get from people. It's just like, how do I make sense of this when I'm frustrated? And it's like, okay, we got to go back. We got to go back and understand our story and who we are. And you said it's origin, history, destiny.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like burned into my brain. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We'll be sharing everything that you talked about, and especially your ministry, to be able to have individuals take your courses, because they're phenomenal, and the work that you're doing. So thank you so much, Damon.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's been a delight to be with you, and thank you for your work with managing my fertility.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and help expand the conversation around women's health. If you'd like to learn more about fertility awareness, visit www.managingyourfertility.com for more information, resources, guides, and so much more.